Dipayan. So good to see you.
Good to see you, David.
Thanks for joining us. I don't know how much of that previous discussion you heard, but the ending was fairly alarming, as I really hoped it would be after having read Ian's note yesterday, and just my eyebrows could not get off the ceiling. What you wrote about and why you wrote your book is very connected to this. This whole point of the national dysfunction that we're in the midst of. So I just wanted to start by asking you, and you can contextualize it in that if you want, but why is Silicon Valley and these companies in particular, why are they destructive by design, and how?
This is exactly the topic of my book, David. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to give my spiel. But I think what I try to talk about in this book is that there's a consistent business model underlying the biggest companies on the internet, the ones that we use every day: Google, Facebook, Amazon, Twitter, Snapchat, and it's a business model that's very much focused on uninhibited data collection, use of that data to create algorithms that addict us and keep us engaged, and profile us and curate our content and target ads at us. And then kind of using a strong arm within the corporate development of these companies to kind of hold rivalry at bay. And no matter which of these companies you look at, that's kind of the design behind their consumer-facing internet presence. And I think it's beyond question that this is kind of the digital and physical infrastructure that enables things like foreign disinformation operations, domestic disinformation, the spread of hate, systemic algorithmic discrimination and political bias, polarization, all of these terrible symptoms that we're seeing bubble up. They are all connected to this business model. And if we truly want to push back against this, the case that I try to make in the book is that it's not enough for us to expect the industry to move itself, because we've lived under those circumstances for quite some time now, and it's produced just about peanuts. And to really move forward now, we need to educate the public and encourage the public sentiment to push politicians, push Congress, push foreign jurisdictions, to begin to take a closer look at that business model, and where the industry collects lots of data, encourage better privacy for individuals. Where the industry engages in anti-competitive practices, essentially develop a better competition policy framework in this country. And where the industry develops sophisticated and opaque algorithms that essentially use our data and make decisions on our behalf in the interests of the company's profits. Give us transparency, and that's kind of the gist of what I write about here.
Okay, I want to get back to break down, and particularly the three elements that you say make up their destructive business model in detail. But before we do, I want to put up the poll. We have a poll to ask our you can slide it out of my face if you want, if you're looking at me here. But we hope that our audience will answer that as we continue. I wanted to step back for a second before we get down into the guts of the business model and how to rectify it. You were in the Obama White House working on tech stuff. Then you went to Facebook. I'm particularly interested in how you ended up in the position you're in now as being a profoundly insightful critic and policy advocate for something radically different. And particularly what you felt when you left Facebook.
Well, my career has definitely thus far has definitely been a bit of a roller coaster. I joined Facebook at a time when, again, it was at the center of so much controversy, and I saw it as a big opportunity to be at the company. I had no doubts that there's an ongoing fight between advocates and the industry for better rights on behalf of the consumer, for sure. And of course, Facebook is at the forefront of the industry. And I had no doubts that I'd be fighting for Facebook's business interests and going there. But I didn't see that necessarily as a bad thing at the time, particularly because I thought that given the fact that Facebook is kind of at the forefront of corporate privacy efforts, that's to say, given that it has a network, it has a business, it has a set of technologies that's really at the forefront of uh, our technological circumstances today and the internet. It would be, first of all, a great learning experience to see how companies think about privacy, and second, a policy opportunity to help influence the way that maybe the most important company on the internet right now, or the second most at least, is thinking about privacy, and try to influence that in a way that could be better for consumers. And I think
What exactly was your role now? Just tell the audience.
I was the company's U.S. privacy advisor. So essentially worked with our policy team, with our product teams on one hand, to try to help develop our products in a way that was sensitive to consumer privacy issues. Build in structures around how we collect data and use data, and ask questions of product managers or advertising folks to try to understand whether we need to do certain things to preserve the technical functionality of the products. That was one half of my job. The second half of my job was helping our policy team think about our arguments in DC, and part of that was certainly working with registered lobbyists at the company, and the broader policy team. So that was the gist of my job, and I was focused again on U.S. issues, so mostly Washington-focused issues. But the U.S. policy team also has at the time had a bit more of a role in defining product than other parts of the policy team, I would say.
Quickly, what were the dates of your being there? You were there for what?
2015 to 17.
So you were there at the time of the election. Yes.
That's right. That's right. And I think to answer or address at least the second part of your question, I think I am a privacy-minded person, and have been since university, and if anything, would fall more on the side of advocates around how companies should think about privacy. And it was what encouraged my doctoral research in the area. And I think seeing the way that not just Facebook, but definitely Facebook, but also the broader industry uses data and tries to bring people onto the platform, mostly in the interest of profit maximization rather than connecting people, was really alarming to me. And what was most alarming was really the election in 2016, where I thought that the company could have done more. I think it could be doing more in the lead up to 2020 as well, to be clear. So I just couldn't see myself kind of prolonging that.
Well, you have a lot of fairly damning things in your book, to say the least. And meaning the title itself, destructive by, terms of disservice, destructive by design. But it doesn't sound like you left in disgust exactly. I mean, I'm actually a little surprised by that. And when I saw some of the people you thanked in your acknowledgments, I was especially surprised. For example, Joel Kaplan. So I mean, I don't want to dwell on this too long, but at the moment, you having been at Facebook, you feel they are existentially threatening to society in their current form, right? But did you figure that out partly after you left? Were you just sort of dissatisfied, and now you've done a lot more research about the big picture, and that's where you've ended up now?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't hesitate to say that I've certainly learned in the 3 years since leaving, and have my perspectives have been informed by more voices, and I've learned a lot from close colleagues like Ben Scott, for example, whom I've written with in the past, and many others that I've worked with over the past 3 years.
At Harvard, no.
so there's no doubt about that. And you know, I wouldn't. I think you're right, though. I'm not in disgust. I don't think that Facebook is any worse, technically speaking, than Google or Amazon or any other dominant digital platform, TikTok for that matter. I don't think that. I'll put it this way: we live in an openly a free and open market, and around 20 years ago, there was a there were certain technological advances that allowed us to pass a threshold and enabled a business model, which we discussed a little bit. And what were those trends? I think that the technologies that really advanced are mainly capacities in data storage, capacities in computing and processing, and of course internet communication. Those were kind of moving up along a curve, and in 2000 or around thereabouts, we hit a threshold, and certain people in the industry recognized that, well, they almost happened upon a business model that was tremendously lucrative.
Oh yeah, I can attest to that.
I don't have a problem with that. And to be honest, if Facebook cut into its business model today, someone else would fill its shoes immediately. So it's not really the people it's not Joel Kaplan, it's not even Mark Zuckerberg. It's not any of these personalities. I think it's really just the fact that we don't have our regulatory system has not evolved, has not really caught up to the technological circumstances of our society today.
Okay, let's go right to that. I mean, you do make this interesting definition of what is a consumer internet company. And you also have a very interesting way of sort of factoring out which companies are that. Facebook is, I think, what, 99% that. Google is what, 40% that or something, 50, I don't know. And YouTube, of course, is pretty much 100% that. Twitter is 100% that. Amazon is 10%. So, but for that, you have a series of policy recommendations that go to the three key areas where you say that model needs regulation. One is around the data collection. Another is around the algorithms and their opacity and how they're doing things with our data, showing us things, but they don't explain to us why. And finally, this growth mandate of relentless growth at all costs, which is a third. I thought that was a very creative and important element that you add to that trio of aspects. If you were to pick the most important regulatory reform you would like to see, let's say in a Biden administration or in the very near future, what would it be?
I think privacy, because I think we can encompass so much in privacy. Privacy is not really about a company collecting certain kinds of information or those kinds of things. I think privacy, just to get straight to it, is giving the consumer complete and utter rights over their personality, over their individuality, and giving them autonomy in the digital ecosystem. And that means, in my personal view, that means really having a way to let consumers tell companies what data they can maintain on them and how they can use it. And if we could effectively do that, and by the way, I think the General Data Protection Regulation intellectually, at a theoretical level, gets to exactly what I'm saying quite effectively. Although the key word is enforcement, and it hasn't been really enforced to the T. But I think that kind of regulatory framework can really, if enforced, can really encourage this sort of change.
Okay, one of the more interesting things that you talk about and that we talked about on the phone is your idea that there are sort of two competing algorithmic machines. This is an incredibly original idea that you've come up with. That there's the one hand, the targeting engine that takes everything about us and shoves whatever is most lucrative for the company in front of us. And that's how they make their money. On the other hand, they have now, especially Facebook and especially in the last year or two, built a competing algorithmic engine, which aims to identify and take down destructive content. But you also sort of seem to take it for granted that if there's two machines, both of them built by Facebook, fighting against each other, it's no doubt which one's going to win.
I think, in my personal view, there is no doubt, because, and this goes back to our allusion to really the open market and capitalism. Put yourself in Mark Zuckerberg's shoes. Do you want the machine that preserves your business model, preserves your capacity to generate the profit margins that you're generating, not just on your own behalf and the behalf of your own wealth, but that of all your investors? Do you want to preserve that machine and help it win, or do you want to enable
Save society? No, go on.
right. Or rather, do you want to enable a secondary machine that you've installed only at the request of regulators and the public, that moderates the first machine? Well, in my view, the answer is very clear, and that's why these problems are just not going away. And that's, by the way, why Mark Zuckerberg in Georgetown and beyond has said over and over again that I'm all for free speech. That argument is exactly in his business interests. It's a very convenient position for him to publicly take, because it doesn't draw regulatory ire from the president and political ire, and doesn't predefine the slippery slope that will eventually come, in my view.
Well, personally, as you know, I'm also a historian of Facebook and wrote a book about it. And
Yes.
I consider the stance that they've taken in regard to that choice fundamentally immoral myself at this point. So, but, what about, there's an interesting time right now. In a week and a half, 2 weeks, there's going to be a hearing in the House, where it is the House, I believe, right?
House Judiciary.
For the four major CEOs of Facebook, Google, Amazon, and Apple are all going to show up, right? Microsoft has been admirably exempted, luckily for them, and probably rightly so, by the way. Meanwhile, we're facing an election we just heard Ian talking very alarmingly about.
Yes.
How worried are you about the landscape? Because we're not moving quickly with regulation, clearly. How manipulable is this landscape today? How much do you worry about the 2020 elections being distorted by the continued existence of these platforms?
I'm extremely worried. Let me be more specific than you were, because cutting straight to the point, I think that we're in as much danger of at the hands of the disinformation problem in 2020, in the context of this presidential election, as we were in 2016, if not more. And I think a couple of reasons for that. First, bad actors have grown in number because they've recognized there's an opportunity at hand. And second, the industry has done very little to counteract their activity. And I'll add a third piece, which is that Facebook has essentially given a free pass to political disinformation disseminated by politicians themselves. And maybe that's an overly general statement, but that is essentially that is essentially the current policy of the company as defined by Mark Zuckerberg at Georgetown. And they've yet to change it. I hope they do before the election.
Do you think they're afraid of Trump? You've been inside their policy apparatus.
I think they are. I think any company should be, and it's not really necessarily because Trump would come after Facebook specifically. It's just that he's so unpredictable. Let's glance at Twitter for a second and recognize that Trump tweeted about the mail-in ballots. And said that they could rig the election, this process. Of course, that was absolutely that was trash. Does not belong on the internet. And or that itself is a bit of a controversial statement. But let's just say that this is a completely untrue statement that could have misled a lot of people. Twitter flagged it and said that this is essentially they called the president a liar, which was, in my personal view, the right thing to do. They flagged the tweet and they said, this may or may not be accurate. Here's some information about it, and they linked to a nonprofit website. The next in the next 2 or 3 days, the president, the White House issued an executive order suggesting that the administration, through the FCC, which is an independent regulatory agency to start with, consider reforming its thinking around Section 230, which is a legally convoluted move.
You're implying that was retaliatory.
Absolutely. And then, and it's not even my implication. I think this was kind of plain to see in the media, at least. And the very next day, Twitter then flagged another one of the president's tweets for a different reason. The one where he said, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts," which Twitter called essentially an incitement to violence. And this is dramatic to see, because you had Jack Dorsey and Twitter standing up to the president of the United States. Yes, there is retaliation, as you put it, and yet the company stood up to it.
Yeah, right after Trump had already begun a retaliatory set of actions. Yeah,
that's right.
Pretty amazing.
That's right. And I think that's why I agree with you about the immorality in certain cases of Zuck, and I think that Facebook should have done more in this case as well. But I think that fear is real.
Okay, I have one more question for you before we end, but I want to, Josh, I think has at least one question from the audience, so go for it, Josh.
Sure.
Great. Let's go to one of our members, Dick Reisman. Hopefully you're there. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, thanks. So, the question I have is that given the fundamental conflict in incentives of the platforms to serve advertisers rather than users and society, isn't the only real solution one that ratchets them from the advertising model so that they get user revenue, because that would align the incentives from engaging users to sell ads to them to providing value to them. And obviously the details of working that out are complicated. So the way to cut through that may be to mandate or tax to drive that ratchet, to force the platforms to figure out how to do that. And people are concerned that that would make the stuff expensive, but smart pricing and reverse metering that tracks to user value could potentially solve that if the platforms are motivated to do it.
Thanks, Dick. That's something Dipayan has thought a lot about and writes about in his book. So take it away, Dipayan.
No, I think it's a brilliant question, Dick, and I appreciate it. I think this is partly a question of margins. I'm not contending that we change the business model itself. I'm not contending that we look at this regime of ad targeting and forcibly tweak Facebook's ad management and ad algorithmic system itself, but rather reorganize the incentives for Facebook to create a machine like that. And another angle on this is that part of the reason that I think that their margins are so high, historically high margins, and as a colleague put it to me, look, we're just a website, and that's, our costs are so low. That's why our margins are so high, and that's part of the reason. But part of the reason the margins are so high is because they're such an effective advertising medium, and they're an effective advertising medium because of targeting, in my view. You could chip away at some of these core practices by encouraging privacy, by encouraging competition, by encouraging transparency, which would diminish, I think, the incentive for Facebook to collect lots of data, or even ability to collect lots of data, profile people, and engage in this ad targeting. Because with with consumer rights over data, a lot of that would kind of be cut out. And yet it's not an attack on the business model itself. It's really just an empowerment of consumers. Or with transparency, if Facebook is potentially, targeting ads in a completely biased way, we could see that and we could push back against that. And advocates like they're doing now, the NAACP and Common Sense Media and the Leadership Conference could say, look, this is ridiculous. You can't continue this. And so the incentives would be kind of shifted around without touching the business model itself. And this is true not just of Facebook. This is the same business model applies to all these companies in the consumer internet. And so and yet, I don't think that would totally kill Facebook. It would just make it so that their profit margins per quarter are not $10 billion, but maybe $2 billion, perhaps. I'm not necessarily saying that these numbers are completely accurate, but what I am suggesting is that when the margins are so high, it becomes clear to me that perhaps there's some exploitation, economic exploitation that's happening here. And I think they would still have attention, even without all this targeting and engagement maximization. They would still have attention through Instagram, through Facebook. They'd still have the ability to generate ad space and sell it off, just not in such exploitative, targeted ways. So anyway, so that's just a couple of
one thing I would chime in on there is you got to also remember, and Dick, this is something you and I think have discussed, but we need to discuss more, is Facebook does perform an unbelievably valuable service for small business in the United States and globally. And it is a critical engine for the success of the small business economy. And for all of my critiques of Facebook, you cannot take away from the fact that if it went away, I think our small business economy would be significantly weakened, and right now is not the time we want to weaken small business. It's the first time they've ever had an effective advertising method for local advertising that allows targeting. So that's critical. One last question, I know we have to wrap, that's why Josh is on screen, but Dipayan, how did your friends at Facebook respond to this book?
I don't want to give away too much here, but I think there's a growing kind of recognition within the company that almost public, which is almost public, I would say, and is becoming more and more public, that there's the business has become kind of a cash cow that exploits society, and there's not only change coming, but that change that is coming is probably necessary to preserve democratic interests. Okay. And so I would summarize the reaction that I've gotten from former colleagues as essentially that kind of sigh of resignation.
Well, I'm glad your former colleagues, many of whom I know are senior, feel that way. Unfortunately, there is one person who still doesn't feel that way, and that remains a problem. But Dipayan, thank you so much. We're going to keep you close at Techonomy, and we're so glad that you're part of our community. This is the second time you've spoken to us, and we look forward to hearing from you again. So thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Thank you for having me.